What's up, Gundam Kitchen and Millennium Hobby fans? I had to do this Miles from Marvel Crisis. They did more of the end of the movie look, and I wanted much more that hoodie and shorts look. To do this, I had to use epoxies. Epoxies are great because you can just add them onto the plastic and they will dry over. I use Tamiya, which is very hard to find in the US. I like it that it's soft. A lot of people will use green stuff, which is the yellow and blue one. And I would actually suggest that you start using Milliput because Milliput is easily available and comes in many different varieties in the US. These are some of the tools that I used. The main tool that I used were these silicone brushes that I found on Amazon, but you can definitely get them from hobby stores. They're used for clay and things like that. They have the metal tip at one end and silicone brushes in different shapes at the other end. Also use a toothpick and an old paintbrush. So one of the things you need to do is build a base when you're doing these, and that's where we're starting from. I already started the hoodie, but it's obviously incomplete. For the epoxies, you need to mix them together till you get a uniform color, so no swirlies left in it. Definitely one of the keys to this is using water to keep your fingers wet because this becomes very tacky as time goes on. I will say, though, that Tamiya claims that their product starts setting within 20 minutes, but I'm pretty sure by adding water, you're extending that time. So this stuff I was able to work easily for 40 minutes to an hour. Usually I didn't need to take that long and was actually hoping it would start firming up so I could manipulate it in a firmer state. Like I said, the Tamiya putty is very soft when working with it, especially if you have your fingers on it because your body heat's warming it up. But that makes it very easy to mold and move around quickly, which is nice. But if you have to do really fine detail, I think a firmer epoxy is better. So towards the end, I use a little bit of green stuff for when I got down to the sneakers and I was putting like the tongue on the sneaker. A couple things like that where it's just very fine detail. I needed to be firm and stuck in one time quickly. As you can see, I use both ends of the sculpting tool and lots of water. Like I said, that water will extend it, but if you just put it down, let it sit for like an hour, it'll become firmer and you can actually then push on a firmer substance if you need that. Like some people will be able to work with it while it's really soft, others will want it more firm. So disclaimer, I am no expert. I'm the kind of hobbyist who likes to try many different things. So I rarely ever stick around doing one technique until I perfect it. I just love to try different things. So I'm sure there's guys out there with way more knowledge in epoxy building and painting, but I just like to dabble and I think I do it pretty well. So hope you guys could take something from this, especially for those guys who like to dabble and you don't need to get super caught up in all the minutia of an expert's level of detail, but you just want to learn how to do something, and I hope that's what this video provides. I also noticed that I tend to grab way more epoxy than I thought because it spreads really well, especially the Tamiya. It spreads right where you want and it can spread thin. That's why I like the Tamiya for this kind of work because you can just stretch it across the surface so it blends in really easily. The green stuff seems to be more firm and doesn't want to move and smoothly go over. You're almost painting this on. As you can see, like I'm using pretty much brush strokes a lot of time, like reverse or forward brush strokes, but they're still brush strokes nonetheless. Now, what's great about epoxies is when they do firm up, they are pretty much a plastic. So anything you could do to the starting plastics, you can do to these. You can sand it, you can scribe it, you can do a lot of things. They are great for more organic modeling, I would say. I don't think this would work really well with Gundams, only very small pieces, and you probably want to cast them so you have more of a uniform flat surface, but they work great for organic modeling. So humans, animals, ghouls, whatever. Doing your, if you do action figures, they work great on that. I've used polymer clay in the past, and I think that polymer clay is great, but you have to bake it. So obviously you can't add that to something and then bake it that's already existing. And another important sculpting tip is that if you were trying to do this from scratch, just trying to build your own character with epoxy, you always want to start with some kind of hard surface to build off of. So Usually in figure building, they'll make an armature. So, use metal rods and then build it up with some aluminum foil or something like that. In our case, since we're just going right on top of a figure, it's perfect. It's just easily to layer right on top of. But you need something for it to stick to, because if you're trying to hold the epoxy in your fingers, it's going to kind of like stay soft and almost melt away. It's not going to melt away, but it's going to stay soft. Now, one of the keys to when you're adding new pieces on is that you wet your finger so the piece, or your tool, so the piece doesn't stick to it, but try to keep the side that's going to be applied to the object dry, because that way it will stick to that object, which a couple times was very frustrating because I wet the whole thing and I couldn't get it to stick very well. So I find it very important to always keep the figure moving so you can check all the angles. How you hold the figure is going to be very important. In this case, Miles was holding on to the newspaper stand, so that wasn't going to work. Clipping them by a leg worked very well. For me, using the epoxy is very important to do this in sections. If you're trying to work on one section and then you're trying to get to another section, and the other section is not dry yet, you're going to easily damage it. And so all the work you did on the previous section is going to get a little messed up. So as you can see, I did the sleeves first, then I did one pant leg or one short leg, and then another short leg, and I slowly built on and let it dry. So overall process took probably 3 to 4 days, but it's probably about, I don't know, 6 to 10 hours of sculpting, maybe not. I don't know. It's hard to tell when you're not doing it all at one time. These different shaped brushes are really helpful because they allow you to imprint and press on the epoxy in different ways. All right, I hope you guys learned a little bit about epoxy putty from this. And let's move on to what really brings the drama to this piece, kind of what motivated me to do the whole piece to start with. I really wanted the idea of Miles floating through the air, and I had a much more complex idea, but I ended up doing keep it simple, stupid, and modified it down to a much more reasonable idea, which I think has a great flow to it. Using a wire to suspend everything made it much more simple of a design. The wire is twist ties that you would use on like a bread bag to close it, those kind of twist ties, stripped of the plastic, and then 3 of them twisted together. This creates a very strong wire. Here's a picture of Miles prime. This is actually the second priming. Definitely, I think, priming once, expecting it not to be perfect, and then going back in and cleaning up any parts you miss sanding is a great technique. They actually make products like Surfacer and stuff like that. They're probably even better at sand than primer. Let's take a look at some of the paints we used for the project. Definitely a lot of Vallejo paints, but simple palette. I really just threw down a simple palette because I'm not sure what I want to do paint-wise with this, but I just wanted to get it painted so that we can always go back and paint over or strip it back down. A little bit of Citadel, and then what I did like was the rust colors I used on the I-beams. And here's how they came out. A little dark, but I didn't really mind that because I wanted Miles to pop a little bit more. So using a dark color for the I-beams worked. I would suggest in general, base it in a lighter orange color. So what I did first was base it in brown primer with brown paint, and then I came back in with Vallejo's Textured Rust, which gives us really nice fine texture that's very reminiscent of rust. And as you can see, the texture shows. But being that it was very dark, I came back in with a light rust wash to give it a little more pop because it was just way too dark. This helped a little bit, but I still came back with Tamiya's brush on weathering product and even dusted a little more, and which is all great because one of the keys of doing weathered rust and any weathering really is you want multiple colors of the same idea, and rust, when you look at it, has many different shades. So it was good that I was able to use multiple products. But as I said, I probably would do this lighter if I was doing this for another project. Now let's look at these pictures all together. Pretty much the final product. Like I said, I definitely want to get back in there and do a little bit more painting, a little more detail painting. But overall, love the flow. Those I-beam rivets at the top there, they were done with just dots of glue, crazy glue on a toothpick dotted on. Obviously, the wire at the bottom is glued in and then covered over with paint, so it's not very obvious until you really start looking. The balance ended up being slightly off if you tilted him towards the front of the piece. So I added a penny to the bottom of the base in the rear, and that helped a lot with the balance, and he's just like sturdy and solid feeling now. Another thing that came up when the picture was posted up on a Facebook group for Marvel Crisis Protocol was transportation. And yes, I agree, this would be a nightmare in foam. Even if you had a piece big enough, he's probably going to come out a little kinked and turned by the time you get him transported. But in my case, and a lot of guys I see nowadays are using the magnetic trays, either through battle foam or creating their own magnetic trays and like toolboxes and putting a sheet of steel down and then magnetizing their bases and applying it that way. All right, hope you guys got something out of this. I really enjoyed this project. It was very challenging, and I will definitely go back in and probably repaint this in a couple of weeks because it doesn't really match the rest of my Marvel Protocol lineup, which I did a very heavy comic book style to with actual like hash lines and all. So I think he needs a little bit more. Thank you for joining in. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this. I did an Iron Man for Marvel Protocol. You can check that out. Hopefully the link is right here. And I will talk to you guys later. Peace.